Cinema Classics is brought to you by the Gateway Film Center, 1550 North High Street, Columbus, Ohio. Further details and showtimes online at gatewayfilmcenter.org.
The award-winning Cinema Classics is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto. Listen to the shows and read reviews online at WCBE.org. I'm John DeSando.
I'm Johnny DiLoretto. This is Cinema Classics.
It is, boy.
And we're talking about a real cinema classic today. This at the upper echelon of all of cinema, right?
Right, Stanley Kubrick.
Now, why are we talking about it?
Now, we're talking about it because Gateway Film Center on the 29th, that will be tomorrow, is presenting Full Metal Jacket. Now, when you think back on Platoon and all those other films, this is one of the big ones.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I mean, there are a handful of great Vietnam War movies, right?
Right.
Coming Home, Apocalypse Now,
Deer Hunter.
The Deer Hunter.
Right.
Platoon.
Yep.
And Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, boy.
I put those 5 at the top.
Yeah.
What was interesting about Full Metal Jacket, so, you know, the Vietnam War was such a painful experience for America and the culture that I read once, I didn't come up with this idea, and I think it's sound, but that movies couldn't get at it unless they approached it from a metaphorical standpoint. They couldn't really, the pain was too fresh, that they came at it from like an allegorical standpoint. So the Deer Hunter, you know, Russian roulette becomes this metaphor for America's involvement in the war. Apocalypse Now treats it as this psychedelic descent into hell. It wasn't until Platoon that, even though there is some metaphor there, you know, between...
But it is hard knocks.
It is basically like taking you ground level into the war and giving you, taking you on a tour through that painful experience for those men. You
know, besides the figurative way that you're talking about, I believe filmmakers hadn't yet figured out how to film a jungle war, for instance. How actually to do that was a kind of new warfare. So until they got to where, I think as you're saying, they got to Platoon, and they started to figure out how they could. Then what I like about Full Metal Jacket is... Right,
and that's what I'm saying. It comes right after Platoon, and it's a little different.
Yeah, and what I like is that half the film is about their training. And that Sergeant Emery, or whatever his name
Lee Ermey.
Yeah, Ermey, well done.
Yeah. Who became a really sort of famous character actor in his own right. And not necessarily famous, but certainly a working character actor. He provided the voice of the little toy soldiers in Toy Soldier Captain Toy Story. But go ahead.
Well, anyway, so that's what I liked about it is that I think it really crystallized how they prepared themselves for the chaos that was to come. I don't believe, as my recollection is, that, for instance, Platoon's a better film. Okay, I just think that whatever warfare part there was pulled off better in Platoon than it was in Full Metal Jacket. There's something about Full Metal Jacket, as I recall, it was too episodic. It didn't. Well,
it feels like 2 movies. So you get that training section with R. Lee Ermey and Vincent D'Onofrio as the private who ends up committing suicide. And then you have Matthew Modine in the second half of the movie. Sort of, if I recall, you know, he's stuck in an office a lot of the time. You know, and yeah, I don't remember a lot of the film actually, because at that time, I feel the mood of it. I remember more the feeling that I got from it. There was something so beautiful about Platoon, about Charlie Sheen's looking at these 2 sergeants, Sergeant Barnes and Sergeant Elias, and one is this, you know, Antichrist, and one is the Christ figure, and he's torn. Like, is this how you fight the war? Do you fight it like this guy, brutally and with no mercy, or do you fight it like this guy, with humanity and compassion? That was intoxicating to me as a young man. Full Metal Jacket threw me for a loop. You know, it lures you in with that really, really simplistic and intensely watchable training sequence that you're talking about. And then it starts to get into it takes you to Hanoi and, you know, the Matthew Modine character, and
street warfare, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and it has a, you know, it's got that Kubrickian distance on it. You know, he's like a sniper aiming at you from afar.
Well, talking about his distance and some of his other stuff, how about 2001 for distance, for cool distance?
Right.
I mean, that's a great notion. I'm starting to think about the rest of his films.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the power of some of his films, is that even in a movie like 2001, where it's almost like a documentary, it almost has a feeling like that it's characterless.
Yeah, it does.
And yet you're sucked into whatever story is there. Because he creates a narrative. He creates that narrative of evolution, you know, from the early ancestors to space travel to, you know, it's there, and so you can follow it. But, you know, his earlier films are, I think, more human. Spartacus.
Well, Lolita,
which is one of the great underrated films
Paths
of all
of
time.
Glory.
Paths of
Kirk
Glory is
Douglas,
amazing.
Man, yeah.
I mean, those are really human, intensely intimate films. Something about his, you know, his own personal makeup, I think, brings him down this line farther along as we get the Kubrick of 2001 and A Clockwork Orange.
He claimed that he had a below average IQ when in fact he had about 200.
Is that right?
Right. But I remember spending a day in Los Angeles Museum of Art looking at Kubrick paraphernalia.
Wow.
He was obsessively detailed.
Yeah.
So that there were notes on everything he'd ever done. There were pieces that he kept, like bling of films. It was just through room. What a mind! And he kept it all.
Yeah.
But here's a guy who never watched his films. He never saw his films. They were completed.
Probably because they were so complete in his head.
I know.
I'm sure he probably had them and didn't want to. He was probably so obsessive that he didn't want to look at the film and then see a deviation from what his original vision was.
I thought exactly. Such a perfectionist that he couldn't bear to look at it. There's a great deal of controversy. Well, I think after the ones that we were talking about, and you get into Dr. Strangelove, and then you get into what I think...
Also with an odd documentary feeling to it.
Boy. And then you go to Space Odyssey, which was in '68. 71, you had A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Now, most people will remember A Clockwork Orange if they've seen it. Don't you think?
Yeah, it's unforgettable.
It is.
Again, and again, even though I can't, like, you know, I've seen Clockwork Orange maybe twice, 2 or 3 times. When I think back on it, I get images pop into my head, much like the images they force onto the Malcolm McDowell character.
Yeah.
Images pop into my head, and then quickly a mood, a feeling, a sense of foreboding. An eerie kind of feeling of losing connection with humanity.
Yep.
He is an indelible, powerful filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think with all the violence going on around the world and in our own country now, this fits even better than it did back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that chaos, the ability of small factions to completely unnerve and disrupt society, really cool. And it was pulled. Clockwork Orange was pulled from distribution. It was causing such controversy in the populace.
Right. And, you know, over the years, when Britain lifted the ban on the movie and they wanted to show it, Kubrick said no. He said no. You missed the boat the first time. You shouldn't have tried to censor me before. And I always thought that was pretty admirable.
Would you be surprised to know that he saw The Godfather more than 10 times? Thought that this was the best movie ever made.
No, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's really interesting because of, you know, what that noirish coolness about
yes,
The Godfather is what makes that movie so beautiful,
yes.
right? It's got this cool noir sort of feel,
Yeah,
but it's this passionate Italian narrative
yes,
driving it.
Yeah.
I've always loved Kubrick's films. I do. I'm a huge fan of Lolita, especially, which I think is one of the great black comedies of all time, and Paths of Glory, which I think is just an amazing wartime courtroom drama.
I'm surprised we haven't mentioned one that probably more people know out there than maybe even Clockwork Orange. The Shining.
Oh, The Shining, yeah, of course. Geez.
Oh, and what he does with Nicholson in that film. What he does again with your thesis about the distance. I mean, we were all observing this.
It's architecture. It's human architecture in some ways, or the architecture of humanity.
Nice.
That movie, you know, The Shining, is a movie that has spawned a movie about people watching that movie. You know, Room 237 is devoted to, you know, the crazy theories that people have come up with because they've been sucked into that world and that mood, that feeling that he creates. It's amazing. No, I don't know that any other filmmaker is capable of doing that.
You know, and I love the ironies around him. One of which is a myth, probably a myth, but that he shot a trespasser on his property. He went over to him and shot him again.
What?
Yes. It was a fan, and he shot him the second time for bleeding on his grass.
You know,
I think that's an apocryphal story, but it does. Also around him, 67 average in high school. He wasn't accepted at university.
Wow.
Don't you love it? Because that is truly his life. These guys are so out there, geniuses like him. Nobody can deal with them.
Do you remember this story recently, the last 10 years, of a guy who was like impersonating Kubrick, living his life as Stanley Kubrick? Have you heard that? Yeah, this guy was impersonating him. I don't know where that story goes, but it just, again, this character, this artist who feeds, feeds the crazy in us. I think, you know, we haven't said a whole lot about Full Metal Jacket. It is definitely an amazing film, you know, an experience. Not always satisfying, but Kubrick doesn't set out to satisfy you. He always sets about to intrigue you, enlighten you, challenge you, and that fits in perfectly with the rest of his filmography. But I don't think we can end the show without saying that Full Metal Jacket gave us one of the great 3-word movie lines of all time. Me so horny.
Ooh, well done.
Yeah, right?
Exactly.
No one has forgotten that.
Oh my God. And we forgot.
Yeah.
On our way out here, we were talking about July 29th at Gateway Film Center for Full Metal Jacket. Let's not forget Kubrick's last film.
Oh, Eyes Wide Shut.
Right, one of our favorite actors.
Another really, I think, brilliant black comedy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
that's funny. Do you remember that movie as a black comedy, or do you remember it as a psychological thriller?
I remember it more because of the interaction of Tom Cruise and his wife, and the difficulties they had in the sex scenes.
Yeah.
And then it cast for me over a more serious note than you're suggesting as a black comedy.
Take another look at it. I'm curious if you see what I saw in it, which is a black comedy masquerading as a psychological thriller about a guy who, despite looking like Tom Cruise, cannot get laid.
And maybe this is a metaphor for our show, which tries to be serious, but always ends up comedic.
Just can't. Whew. That was a long one.
Yeah, boy, that was a good one.
Remember it as a psychological thriller.
I remember it more because of the interaction of Tom Cruise and his wife, and the difficulties they had in the sex scenes. Yeah. And then it cast for me over a more serious note than you're suggesting as a black comedy.
Take another look at it. I'm curious if you see what I saw in it, which is a black comedy masquerading as a psychological thriller about a guy who, despite looking like Tom Cruise, cannot get laid.
And maybe this is a metaphor for our show, which tries to be serious, but always ends up comedic.
Just can't.